What do we know about Britain's role in slavery? Mostly our focus is on claiming the credit for ending it, with heroic stories about William Wilberforce and the abolitionists. We remain painfully unaware of Britain's transatlantic slave trade. Now, London Mayor Sadiq Khan has backed proposals to build a British slavery museum in London to help challenge racism. At least 12 million African people were forced into slavery, and Britain traded millions of these stolen lives, forcing them onto slave ships across the Atlantic in unimaginable conditions. Britain grew wealthy because of its transatlantic slave trade, which powered the Industrial Revolution and helped build the banking industry, as well as the nation's ports, canals, roads and cities. We shouldn't shy away from an honest conversation about this, and a new slavery museum in the capital could be a cornerstone of that discussion. Of course, it won't make racism disappear, but it can help us understand where racism comes from. It can help us understand Britain's history as a slave-trading nation, and it can help us understand the responsibility Britain has for global inequalities that are still playing out today.
Rachel, I support a museum in the sense that it will be telling a very powerful story. But, I mean, don't kid yourself, it's going to help tackle or solve racism in any way, shape or form. Racism won't suddenly melt away because the powerful light of truth has been shone upon it. It's naive to think it will. And the fact of it is the very people who need to learn about racism and about where it came from are not the kind of people that will go to a slave museum in London or in Liverpool. Because, let me finish, because they don't care. They're not empathetic, they're not sympathetic. But let me make a point and then I'll shut up about it. I think we've got to stop 200, 300 years on. We've got to stop beating ourselves up about the slave trade. We were not uniquely oppressive. Our history was not exceptional. We were doing what you have just described. Well, let me finish. We were doing what you just described at a time when most societies were doing it, when it was normal for the strong to enslave the weak. That has changed. We can't change that. We can't change the past, but we can change the future. And I think this country has taken massive strides to change what happened in the past. But we can't blame people today for what happened.
Can I ask you a question? Carol, when was that moment when we so beat ourselves up about the slave trade? For example, can you name a single person who was enslaved by the British?
Can I?
Yeah.
Well, of course not.
What do you mean? There were probably 20 million Africans enslaved. Britain was, contrary to what you said, actually a pioneer in developing and industrialising the slave trade. It was a major slave trading nation, and actually, at a time when other nations weren't doing it, we were leading the way. Right, so if we've had this whole period where we beat ourselves up and it's time to move on, when was that, and who can you name? Which of these millions of Africans that we enslaved, who were branded with our royal seal, because the royal family owned the company that enslaved them, which of them could you name? Tell me anything about any of their lives.
You're putting a very emotional argument forward, and of course I don't know. But the people who will go to the Slavery Museum and learn about slavery are the people who will already have a very good idea about what happened hundreds of years ago. The people that Rachel's talking about.
Do you include yourself
that it might
in that demographic group of people?
Do I include myself?
Well, you said that the people who care.
You're going to accuse me of being a racist?
No, I've just asked you a question.
Well, you asked me, do I know anyone who was enslaved? The answer to that question is no.
Would you go to a museum?
Of course I would.
Then I think there would be a benefit in having a museum, because maybe you would learn
because I'm not
the story of an enslaved person.
That's why I'd go to a museum like that.
Actually, I would. One of the reasons I would welcome a museum is that I also think that I have much to learn about this issue. When I went to the Museum of Slavery in Liverpool, I found that an incredibly informative experience in the sense that we don't really know the extent to which it has powered this country. Let me finish, Carol. That the trade in slavery and slave-produced goods, cotton, sugar, tobacco, created the wealth in this country. It powered the Industrial Revolution.
You are enlightened.
Let me finish, Carol. It powered the Industrial Revolution. It produced entire new industries, cotton manufacturing, sugar refinery,
and insurance.
Banking and insurance. It underwrote the coal industry and the steam engine.
Let's get other voices in.
Hang on, so I'm not saying, because I really want to finish, I'm not saying It's about guilt. It's not about guilt. It's about understanding Britain's responsibility
and
role. And
I think having a British Slavery Museum in London doesn't necessarily imply that our role in history was unique. So I think that's a bit of a straw man in that nobody claimed that it means that we were uniquely to blame in history. I think it actually does serve an educational role. The point you mentioned about racists wouldn't attend anyway, I think there is a point you're missing here, which is children would go to this museum and there'd be school trips, as there are to all museums. And, of course, children can learn as they're growing about the history, and that stops, on a preventative side, it can stop somebody growing to become a racist. So there's also a preventative measure there. Wait, let me finish my point.
I want to answer that point. I want to answer that point. Put it in the school curriculum in that case. Teach kids about it from a very early age.
You're trying to argue against having a museum.
No, I'm not. The very first words I said were, I support the idea.
So what are you disagreeing with here? With what I just said, what is it you're disagreeing with? I just said children.
I'm disagreeing with that for suggesting I'm racist.
I
just want to bring in Dr. Omar Khan, who's the director of the Runnymede Trust, on why a slavery museum in London would be a good idea.
It's important that we reflect and commemorate on those times in the past when we and other nations failed to live up those values, because we learn more morally and politically from those times when we failed to live up to those values. It's not inevitable that we will always support democracy, equality, and freedom for everyone.
I think that, fantastic, what a good idea. But can I just be assured, Rachel, that it would also, because it will show all the dark side, absolutely right, but it will also celebrate the fact that Britain was involved in bringing it to an end. The museum would show that as well.
I don't think we're short of that, though, Nick, because
so the museum wouldn't show that?
Everybody can name William Wilberforce.